Hello, I'm Fiona Boyd and CEO and co-founder of EdSmart, an edtech-based company based in Melbourne, Australia. As we have schools customers in 8 countries, and key leaders of one of our bigger customers is joining me today for this fireside chat. Welcome to Sharyn Creed and Allan Sheffield from the Brisbane Catholic Education Group. Welcome, Sharyn. Welcome, Allan.
Hi, Fiona.
Great to be here.
Sharyn is Manager of IT and Learning Services, and Allan is Manager of School Information Systems at Brisbane Catholic Education, a group that educates every year over 77,000 students and has a staff of more than 12,000. The genesis of the conversation we're going to have today came to me by a comment made by one of the principals of Brisbane Catholic Ed last year. And he said that word had got around that the group had been able to achieve 3 years of technology skills know-how across all staff in just 3 months, which is absolutely remarkable. Firstly, congratulations to both of you. That's just like such a huge leapfrog in knowledge acquisition. Like, well done.
Thank you. It was fun.
You have an interesting way of having fun.
That probably hides a little bit of the journey, that took place before that as well. It may, appear on the surface that it all happened quite quickly, but there was, a lot of work went behind the scenes previous to that.
And I'm thinking that's what we probably, the audience wants to explore today is exactly what that work looked like that put you in such a good position to achieve this. So like starting with you, Sharyn, but like either jump in where you've got a comment to add. What do you think were the key things that enabled the group to quickly take 145 schools pretty much all at once from offline to fully online learning?
And I think it goes to what Allan said, Fiona. Our journey to the cloud really started several years ago. So we weren't in a position where we had to do everything at once. We have 146 schools and 8 offices, and they were already connected to one wide area network and to a range of enterprise-wide systems. So our staff were used to working online in their school and student admin systems and in their SharePoint school portals. So for example, they were used to marking the roles online, to accessing their files, to collaborating and reporting in those online spaces. And similarly, our parents, they were used to receiving and accessing information via our parent portals and our mobile apps, as well as via their class blogs. So they knew of those environments. They probably weren't as practiced in using them, but that would come. We also had previously introduced Microsoft 0365 and the Microsoft Teams tools to our students and to our staff in years prior to 2020. So they weren't necessarily as practiced as they are at the moment, but I think we were in a good position to start. We'd also been working with our schools to deliver a digital skills program. So that program was really aimed at increasing teacher confidence and their digital literacy skills. And at that time, it was quite a different program in that we were going into schools, doing a lot of coaching and modelling with teachers in classrooms. So I think with all of those elements in play and with a really sound technical environment, we were ready.
And you did it super fast. It was really efficient. I mean, what strikes me here is that it actually was all of those years in the planning and the project management that you'd done that enabled you to do it so efficiently. I mean, in the lived experience, what was it like? I mean, take yourself back to then, and what was it like? When did you know for sure you had to push the button on this?
We're trying not to think about it too deeply, Fiona, in that it was really busy, and it was quite a stressful time for people, even though we had really great environments in play and our systems were ready. It was still something different, so the change element was quite stressful for people. There was a little bit of anxiety around. But our technical team were there to manage and monitor those environments. But it did highlight the different skill sets, especially across our schools. So at that time, we had to call on people that we'd perhaps not necessarily worked really closely with before. So we had to work really closely and align ourselves with our education officers, with our digital support team, and we also had to engage with our vendors really closely. So they were kind of the key players in our environment that made things happen.
So I'm just thinking in terms of the fact you had a lot of your infrastructure on the cloud already. How much of an advantage was that to Brisbane Catholic Education as opposed to other groups that didn't?
I think for us, we could perhaps focus our attention on schools and the support of schools and classrooms and teachers and students. We didn't necessarily have to focus on getting tools and environments and systems ready for them. They were already there. So really we were focusing on upskilling our teaching staff and those that supported them. And that's really where we could focus all of our energy. So I think that's the point of differentiation.
The technology was already in place. It was quickly getting all of the teachers and the people within the school arena to the point where their skills were capable of using it effectively.
Yes.
Yeah. So, Allan, you were in charge of all of the systems at this time, and you are now. So the pressure really came on, didn't it? I'm just wondering, what were the biggest challenges you faced at the time? Did you have any nervousness that anything was not going to hold up?
Oh, sure. Yeah. A lot of nervousness, and I think what went really well, what was really satisfying, was just to see the culmination of the work that had taken place over the previous few years. As Sharyn mentioned, all the infrastructure work, all the work around the applications, enterprise systems, the change management team we've had on the ground working with schools day in, day out. Really at that point, we knew that we're going to go to remote learning, that we would see the kind of the fruits of that labour, and we had a really solid platform on which to provide learning experiences for students at home and to connect with parents. We had lots of great practices around class notebook and assignments. So it was really satisfying to see that work had really helped us during that COVID period. Some of the challenges was that initially some of those cloud services struggled to cope with the demand over that first week or so. So that was a real challenge, because in that preparation, schools had really put some of their eggs in one basket to provide that online learning at home. All of a sudden, they had to switch to something that wasn't encumbered by this kind of slowness, which we experienced in the first week. And that really speaks to the ingenuity of teachers and schools to be able to kind of, flip on a dime and change their practice while those cloud services expanded, and within a week or so, they were able to resume their kind of normal practices as well. So that was a challenge really in that first week or so, as those services coped with the demand. The other challenge really is that, our teachers were not used to delivering those kind of online lessons. So if they'd chosen to deliver their lessons, in that live meetings environment, teachers aren't really used to that. Educators aren't used to that, as we weren't either. Folks who are office-based are not used to that as well. So just being able to provide the professional support for that, to upskill teachers and able to deliver an online lesson, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, that's a key thing, isn't it? Because teachers, that level of, I guess, how am I presenting myself? When you're a teacher, you've got your plan and you're activating the elements of it, but suddenly you're also presenting a show, maybe. That's been daunting for
that's
some.
right. And some of the challenges around devices as well. We've got some schools that, they might have a really well-established one-on-one program and the students are already taking their computers home. Others may not have been so well resourced, and all of a sudden they're pulling devices out of libraries and out of classrooms and putting them in, students' hands kind of overnight almost, or within a few days, sending them home. So different schools require different levels of support as well. So not only in teacher upskilling, but also in how to handle their devices.
Just in terms of what went wrong, was there anything that sort of gave you a nightmare along the way, Allan?
I wouldn't say nightmare. I always felt that we could respond to that, or that our vendors would respond to that. So in terms of that initial slowness, that there was understandably some concern about that, concern from schools, but I always felt that we could get on top of that. And same with any of the issues around online meetings, about how to best undertake those, how to promote student safety. I felt that they were concerns, but I felt that we could, learn as we go and address those as we went along, because it was new for everyone. Everyone in the world was facing those same issues, and we weren't alone in that.
And Fiona, perhaps it wasn't something that actually went wrong, but one of the things that we perhaps didn't consider in the first instance was the support of the technical staff in our schools, and because they were also having to work in a different way. They were now managing and monitoring student devices at home. And we'd really never done that before. So one of the things we had to do was work with our technical staff in helping them to understand how to interact with students one-on-one on home devices. Because for many, that may have put the technician in an awkward position in that they had access to students one-on-one, which is something that wouldn't have occurred in the school environment. So we did have to put for them policies and procedures in place in supporting them in their work with students in the home environment.
I would have thought there was a lot of policy and procedure shift at the time, because it was totally new. Some of the things that were being expected of some of your team, as you say, are things that they had never done in that way before. Was that on your plate to a large degree, Sharyn, to really develop those?
It wasn't one of those things we really proactively thought about, to be honest. It was one of those things that we did react to. So ensuring that people were well aware of the acceptable use statements, for example, due diligence around using other web applications in that learning and teaching space. So you're right, some of the policies and procedures that were actually already there really needed to be put in front of teachers and school administrators again.
Yeah. Just in terms of Brisbane Catholic Education is a large network. It's one of the larger ones that's not a Ministry of Education in Australia. Pre-coronavirus, what was the technology skills training looking like? You did have a plan and it was moving. It just had to move a lot faster. What did it look like before the coronavirus?
You're right. We did have to move fast. So we made mention of the fact that we had this digital skills program in play beforehand. So people were really aware of the environments that they were working in and a range of enterprise applications that they had access to. But realistically, the student digital skills and the digital literacy of our staff really wasn't where we expected them to be. And I think that goes across all systems really. So we had these fantastic pockets of really great innovation and uptake, but those skills weren't really common, and they certainly weren't common or expected across all of our staff and all of our classrooms. So I think that's what COVID did for us. It really put the spotlight on the skill set that was necessary to work in this digital age. So some of those digital support program leads were at one time really having to go out there and sell their services. But COVID meant that everyone was coming to them. And they were asking the same questions. They were looking for the same services. So that was kind of a bit of a flip for us. We didn't have to sell it as much. But teachers and our education officer staff as well, all of a sudden had this common purpose, a common need, and a common set of expectations for how people use the tools and what they needed to use them effectively in the classroom. And I think you're right. Without COVID, it would have been a really large, complex, expensive change management exercise that would have taken years to get to where we are at the moment, and a lot of budget to initiate. So it was a little bit of a blessing in disguise.
Congratulations on that, because it really does sound like you had the people with the know-how, and you could scale them up when this happened. And in many other cases, the people just aren't there. Those technical skills specialists just weren't available. So, I mean, that's, good thinking, long-term thinking. I'm just wondering, though, how did that team cope? I mean, they were not in demand, and then suddenly they're in demand, and everyone wants to ask them probably not one question, but a whole series of questions. How did they go?
So they became the most important people in our system there at one point. So we kind of got to this point probably at this time last year where we knew that we weren't coming back after the Easter break, and we knew that remote learning was going to take place. So we had probably about 2 weeks to build a broader team and think about how we would best prepare our teachers. So alongside our little digital skills team, we also built a base of education officers who were within our system, but they were deployed to a whole range of other tasks. So those teams essentially came together to build what we call an AEP program, an alternative education program. So that included, and I'll let Allan elaborate a little bit, but it was essentially a whole range of online conferences and how-to sessions. That was a collaboration between those 2 team members.
Yeah, that's right. And a really exciting part of that was just that collaboration between, IT and learning and teaching. We were able to put together that agenda for this virtual conference. So teachers from across the organisation could choose their session, which might be around, how to run an online meeting in Teams, or how to distribute, content when your students have iPads at home, or, I've recorded an online meeting. How do I record that, and where do I share that? So really kind of practical stuff, as well as about, best practices around pedagogy and curriculum. So we delivered that over this kind of 3-day conference, and we advertised that. And the response to that was huge. We had, hundreds, even thousands of teachers over the course of that 3 days join us. And the interesting thing was that you might have in your meeting this one person pop up as an identity, but then you look behind that camera and there'll be a whole staff room of 30 teachers who are just joining to that one account. So it was actually hard to capture the true amount of teachers and the impact that we had through those online meetings. And the other part of that, the exciting part of that really, and this is something that emerged as a theme, was that it continued to kind of undermine, I guess, some of those traditional silos that occurred like between schools.
Yeah.
And the barrier of distance in terms of those schools and teachers being able to collaborate together and to be able to feel like they're not isolated. So that was that kind of early picture, like, hang on, we can all overcome that kind of tyranny of distance and the traditional silos that we have to work together. And I remember I was running one of those sessions, and it was kind of this Ask Me Anything session, and people would just pop up from, join the meeting from, here's someone from a small town 3 hours away, and here's someone from an inner city school just popping up and talking together and talking to me. That was just very exciting, I think.
They're wonderful games, and I'm just wondering, how do you maintain them and consolidate them? Because I suppose post that experience, the tendency is to revert back to what you were doing before. But if you've been able to create this way more connectedness across your schools and your individuals in them, I would think you want to keep that.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that will be one of those test of time activities to see what components of that experience teachers, parents and students want to keep. So we haven't really been tested terribly there, but I think we have really built a greater support base than we've ever had before. So now we're seeing experts in schools popping up, and school staff being able to support and mentor their own teachers rather than that huge reliance on our team centrally. So if anything, I think we've built kind of a distributed support base, and I hope that continues.
That builds strength in your model, doesn't it? Because you now have distributed all of the different points of practice, so that it's not posited in one place, and then leading the group to be vulnerable if something happens to that area or that person. That's fantastic. I think this is something groups, businesses, everyone aims for. But to get it, do you get that really buzzy sense of this was an ideal and we've achieved it and we can keep growing from there?
Yeah, well, yes and no. It feels like that we've made so much progress. I think all organisations are contemplating that. How do we make sure that we don't return to normal? How can we, leverage what we've learned over that time? And I think for education, it kind of opens up broader philosophical questions about education. I mean, so it's not so much about the technology. We've got this great technology. Education for so long has been about year levels and grades and subjects. On one hand, we can use technology to help with that existing model, to supercharge that model, that industrial model that we've had around subjects, grades, year levels. Or, can technology partner with pedagogy or partner with learning and teaching to transform schooling and create something new? And I think some of those questions are being contemplated by educators all around the world.
Which is fantastic, because isn't it time to transform? If you look inside a classroom, every learner has the capacity to make progress. And as you say, stuck inside an industrial model kind of leads to winners and losers, which, education wasn't originally to be winners and losers, I don't think.
And how, that's right. How do we, partner with technology to promote this notion of student voice, and is it through technology we can raise the profile of that student voice in that new model? I think that's an exciting opportunity as well.
So Sharyn, you and I have had a separate discussion, and we chatted about the fact that some of the gains that the group has been able to achieve, and you've been able to achieve leading from your seat in the organisation, they're not just technology gains, they've been human gains. How did you capture them and what were they?
So I think in terms of capturing them, it was really talking with people and having people share their experiences in a space that they felt safe to do so. So we did a lot of visits to schools. We had surveys going, so we did capture a lot of information around the experience. And I guess just a couple of key recurring themes to share with you. Probably one of the biggest was that there was noticeable growth in learning independence and resilience for both students and staff. So that wasn't necessarily at all to do with the technology, but just putting people in that change of space where independence and resilience became great skills to have. So that was probably one area. The other was there was noticeable and authentic collaboration amongst staff across year levels and across subject areas. So that collaboration was no longer restricted to you and your teaching partner or the people within your school even. So collaboration across year levels, being that everyone was learning together. And that was probably the other area, that concept of increased risk-taking in those environments. So people were failing together and growing together all at the same time. And there was a degree of comfort in that, I think. So that concept of risk-taking. The other one was the precision of pedagogy. So by that, I mean being able to and wanting to differentiate the learning to meet different student needs. So the COVID experience, not that it enabled that, but it definitely promoted the need for that. Students were individually working in their homes. So teachers, I think, saw the need to differentiate the experience for these students. So that was another key theme. Allan mentioned that concept of student voice, and that came through really clearly across all of our schools. It was mentioned wherever we went. So they found students were more curious. They were asking deeper questions. There was a lot of peer interaction and peer tutoring going on, so helping each other. There was definitely more self-directed learning and the need for time management in that student space. So that was some of the positives coming out of that. And probably the biggest of the key themes was those strengthened partnerships between the teachers and parents and carers. So that parent engagement concept was one of those things that schools don't want to give up. When they go back to classrooms, that's one of the elements that they do want to explore a little bit more deeply. So none of those things really had a whole lot to do with technology systems or online tools. It was changes in the way of working.
It just strikes me, and we certainly put some blog posts out at EdSmart, that this was an opportunity, maybe the first, to create school community as a constellation of the different players, and to bring them together in an ecosystem where they had a close to fair and equal voice. How do you view that? Is there any value in that idea?
Absolutely, and I think we're hearing that not just in our schools, but across the world. Some of those things are being highlighted, and I think also a lot of that's being driven by the students. So the students want those collaborations to continue. They want their parents to be involved in their learning and understand what's happening in the classroom.
Yeah, and I was just going to reiterate what Sharyn was saying around the feedback that we have about from parents, and that is really something they would love to hang on to, that capacity to connect with the schools in a variety of ways. So you can still make the school visit, but for those parents who can never get to those meetings and hadn't, weren't able to get there in the past, all of a sudden they were, during that COVID period and post-COVID, we're able to have those online meetings and have a presence at the school. So overwhelmingly, we hear that as a practice they'd like to continue. You know, in terms of that student engagement, yes, you know, during that COVID period, it was really interesting to see some of the analytics about, you know, when students were kind of connecting to the technology and when they were choosing to work, you know, it wasn't necessarily, again, we talked about the industrial model that they, you know, not necessarily at that kind of 8 to 3 time. We saw that they were, you know, connecting at times that kind of suited them or suited their family and suited their other things that are happening in their lives. So I think from that perspective, it, you know, gave that rise to that notion of student voice as well.
I'm just wondering, Allan, because you know you run the systems, the technology systems. Was there a piece of technology that you wish you had had during this? Did you identify a gap or the next thing?
Probably something around maybe, you know, sharing the kind of effortlessly sharing evidence of learning with our parents as well. That felt like a little bit of a missing piece for us. The kind of notion of, you know, we're kind of calling it progressive reporting, but something that you can really safely and effortlessly share those evidence of learning with parents along that journey. In retrospect, that would have been something that would have been useful at the time, and it's something that we've identified as a need moving forward as well.
This was such a big high stakes situation that you both worked side by side to manage your way through. No, Sharyn, this is just a huge achievement. What would you like to do next with the group or with a project? Because this is a pretty, you know, sensational thing you've pulled off here. I mean, I'm sure you're not just going, okay, I'm done now.
No, definitely not. There are still gaps, and Allan's highlighted one of them being that we understand that transformational change starts in the classroom. So with the teachers and the students, so we really want to explore how we can take that forward and enable that true transformation. So that concept of using technology to facilitate individual and adaptive learning environments, I think that's one of the things that we'd really love to explore, and supporting teachers in providing that differentiated support for different students. So that's probably one of the elements we would like to do some more work in. We'd also like to concentrate on our parents and giving them that ongoing access to student learning and formative assessment, not just spitting out the summative reports at the end of the year. So how do we bring parents into the learning space in such a way that teachers feel comfortable with that as well? So that's probably another gap we'd like to address. We'd also like to continue to try and reduce some of those school admin tasks and those complex or time-consuming business processes that teachers have to deal with. So if there are ways of streamlining, you know, from enrolment through to putting timetables together, if we can do anything to help there, we would like to. And probably the what I mentioned before, Fiona, around our technical staff in schools. We'd really like to do a little bit more work in helping to guide those technicians, knowing that we don't actually manage them centrally, but if we can provide more advice, more consistent messaging around policies, procedures, how to build devices, what content filtering to put in place. I think that would be a gap we'd like to address as well. So we won't be stopping here.
That's fantastic. And Allan, do you have some more words on the transformation of education? Because talking before, it was clear this is a very exciting prospect for you. Probably you got.
That's right. And some of the, you know, a lot of that needs to be done, you know, not in isolation, I guess, you know, in terms of, you know, we've got IT, but that needs to be done in partnership with learning and teaching about, as I said before, you know, we can either, you know, use technology to supercharge that industrial model, or can we create something new for, you know, the 21st century? But that can't be done in isolation. Really, it's about, you know, at that end, it's also about the pedagogy and the curriculum, and it's really in partnership with learning and teaching that we can address that. And also as a system, you know, we've got those challenges and the amount of work that we put on teachers. And as Sharyn was talking about, you know, we create a lot of admin, a lot of compliance, a lot of bureaucratic stuff that our teachers and our schools have to deal with, and that has been eating into their time and creating less time for teaching, creating less time for kind of higher order tasks. So yes, we can use our systems to reduce the burden of that for schools and reduce the burden of that for teachers. But on the other hand, we seem to have this endless supply of it we can throw at teachers.
Yeah.
So we can, you know, reduce the workload with something else. We seem to fill it up with something else. So I think, you know, that's an IT challenge or a systems challenge, but it's also a challenge for the whole organisation as well. That, you know, it's no point being more efficient in one area where we're just going to throw more stuff at them. So I think that's not just an IT issue, it's an issue for Brisbane Catholic Education and probably education systems everywhere.
I've got to say that was one of the key reasons we started EdSmart, was to lighten the burden on teachers around things that don't require human labour, that can be automated and done a digital way. But you're right. It's like, well, you lighten one burden and something else comes along on their plate. Our view was always teachers do the human work of teaching, and the teaching learning process is very complex and it requires that human element. You know, taking teachers off that, they didn't do their Masters of Education and higher study for moving paper around or chasing a process through a system. So I'm really glad to hear you're for teachers. Just with you, Sharyn, you know, with teachers, where do you see them in this constellation? Are you for teachers? Are you backing them with everything you do?
Oh, absolutely. We wouldn't be here really if we weren't really conscious of lightening the load for teachers such that they could provide their focused and individualised attention on the kids and what's happening in the classrooms. So for us, we are really working with our end users in mind all of the time. So each time we present a system, we present it in such a way that it is trying to either ease the burden or make some process simpler for teachers and for the students. But if it doesn't, we shouldn't be doing it. So that's kind of where we're coming from.
Thank you to you both. It's been a delight talking to you today, and I know that there are so many gems of wisdom that the guest audience is going to be able to pick up on and use for themselves. So thank you, Sharyn Creed and Allan Sheffield from Brisbane Catholic Education.
Thanks, Fiona.